Fala pessoal, boa tarde nesse feriadão. E aí, Pedro, tudo bem?
Eu tô bem, e você, Vini? Boa tarde, galera.
Tudo ótimo.
Hoje é um ótimo dia de feriado aí, né?
É isso
Vai
aí,
ser bem legal.
feriadão, 7 de setembro. Mas estamos juntos aqui, né? Mais uma vez, aproveitar o dia de feriado. E o Pedro aqui convidou o Sayak, não sei se eu estou pronunciando corretamente, que vai conversar aqui com a gente hoje, certo, Pedro?
Exatamente. Dando uma breve introdução, o Sayak, ele é um GDE também, né? Assim como o Vini, um Google Developer Expert. E ele também trabalha como Machine Learning Engineer na Carthage, que é uma empresa aí grande no ramo de... Eu acho que trabalha em, tipo, Mercado Livre, esse tipo de coisa, né? De e-commerce, se eu não me engano. E, além disso, eu sou muito fã dele. Ele contribui para diversos projetos open source, como o Keras, o TensorFlow, o Keras CV. Aí tem toda a parte do Hugging Face que ele tem contribuído. Fora todos os artigos técnicos que ele escreve, que se você nunca leu, eu recomendo muito que você leia, você vai aprender demais. Tipo, muito bom mesmo. E, bom, é um prazer, né, poder recebê-lo aqui, ter essa oportunidade de a gente ouvir direto dele sobre um assunto que o pessoal fala pouco, mas que é muito importante, né? Como o open source tem modificado o cenário da comunidade de machine learning.
Eu arrisco dizer assim, se alguém que está nos assistindo ou vai assistir depois nunca usou nada open source, nenhum modelo pré-treinado, nada, assim, eu duvido que alguém no mundo de data science nunca usou nada open source. E a comunidade, que eu acho que é legal frisar, que é bastante isso, não é só usar, né? Não é só pegar, contribuir de volta, pegar, modificar, melhorar, contribuir. E o Sayak contribui muito mesmo com a comunidade. E hoje ele vai falar um pouquinho dessa contribuição que o Pedro falou super bem. Vale muito a pena seguir ele. A partir de agora, a gente vai começar a falar inglês. Tá? Só vamos trazer o Sayak aqui para a tela. Vamos começar a falar inglês. E se tiverem qualquer dúvida, quiserem fazer comentários, pode mandar em português, que a gente traduz. Se você não se sentir à vontade de perguntar, fica super à vontade. E depois também, quem for assistir mais tarde essa live, também pode mandar aqui nos comentários, e-mail, fique super à vontade. Então, let's start in English now, Pedro,
Yeah,
and let's
I will
invite.
add. Sayak. Hey,
Okay,
Sayak,
Sayak,
how are you? Thank you
welcome.
again to accept our
Sorry?
invitation. Thank you
Sorry?
again to accept our
Yeah,
invitation to be here. Yeah, as
no
I
worries.
as I told you, I am a big fan of your work. I think I read almost all your articles about the distillation stuff and this kind of things. I think you are my reference in this topic. So thank you a lot. And the stage is yours. We will be on the backstage. So let us know if you need something.
All right. Is my screen visible?
I will add. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Thank you. I'll get started. Thanks for joining in, folks. I'm sorry I do not know Portuguese. And also, as a fun fact, Brazil happens to be one of my favorite soccer player countries. I especially like Roberto Carlos's free kicks. I also like Ronaldinho. I also like Ronaldo. So yeah, Brazil is really close to my heart, and I would love to visit the country in person someday. But yeah, it's a shame that I do not know Portuguese, so we'll have to just continue in English. So someday, maybe. And also, I just wanted to have this disclaimer that if I am going too fast, just let the organizers know in the comment section, and I would request the organizers to interrupt me, just ask me to go slower and I'll go slower. So yeah, so today I wanted to talk to you about how to, you know, enable yourselves with possibilities with open source in machine learning. Of course, since the talk title already has machine learning inside of it, I believe this talk will particularly be beneficial for folks that want to pursue machine learning as a potential career option. But I feel like the approaches we are going to discuss throughout this talk will equally be helpful for folks working in other domains of software engineering, let's say web development. So with that in mind, let's get started. So sort of shamelessly reintroducing myself, I'm very much thankful for the kind introduction by Pedro. So I'm a machine learning engineer at Carded. We are into e-commerce. We want to enable developers with our suite of APIs with which they can build seamless shopping experiences. I also contribute to Keras, Hugging Face Transformers, Keras CV, etc. And when I'm not really working, I like to binge watch stuff on Netflix. I'm currently completing Better Call Saul, probably the last episode, last season. And if you want my coordinates, they are here, sayak.dev. You will get everything there. Everything that I do publicly, all of that stuff is at sayak.dev. Yeah. And also, if you have got any questions, please keep them coming in the chat so that we can get to those questions, answer them after my talk is done. And I'll try to keep this talk short, fun, and hopefully helpful for you. And of course, why does this talk exist in the first place? So, in my opinion, machine learning and open source both are very different fields, at least qualitatively, but they are also very intertwined. They are very connected, right? So, with this talk, I wanted to explore the connections of machine learning and open source and how open source can benefit some of the challenges that are faced by the machine learning communities uh, currently. And also, since these two fields are quite vast, I wanted to share a couple of approaches that I've learned from my own experience and sort of in the hope that they will help you to navigate through these two very vast different fields, right? And also on the other hand, I wanted to connect two broader school of thoughts, like one, how you can effectively use the opportunities provided in open source to improve as a machine learning practitioner, and how you can leverage the open source platforms in order to sort of hone your machine learning practitioner skills. So I have got two broader goals in my mind when uh, for this talk. So hopefully those will be made clear after the talk is done. All right, here are some basic things about open source, basically expectations and stuff. So let's start with that. So in open source, we do not usually reward something with, any monetary prizes or something. It's just what it just works without any finite expectations, right? You contribute to a library, and I think at the same time you cannot be expecting that okay, you are gonna get a job offer from Google or something like that. Open source does not work like that way. Open source has a feeling of enablement in the first place. You want the users to you know use things in a better manner, in a cleaner manner, in a simpler manner. That's why you probably saw some opportunity. That's why you probably contributed a component to, let's say, a particular open source framework. And that particular contribution, that is only motivated by that is governed by what users are facing to be challenging. It does not work with any finite expectations like monetary prizes or something, or a planned trip to Google's offices. It does not work like that. And it also sort of benefits from mutual trust and flourishes from constructive dialogue. By this, I essentially mean, let's say I am a maintainer of a particular library, and if you want to contribute a component to that library, and if you have got the relevant skills, even if you do not have, if you are willing to contribute that component to that library, I will sort of trust you, because it's a very precious feeling to see other folks that are interested in contributing something to my library. It's a precious feeling. And it also flourishes from constructive dialogue, right? Let's say you have opened up, if you have, let's say you have opened a pull request to on a particular GitHub repository, and you will get, feedback on your pull request. Some of the feedback may be negative, but of course, stated in a decent manner. Some of the feedback will truly be very positive. But yeah, I mean, this is all a part of constructive criticism. So it sort of flourishes from that kind of dialogue, because it helps the community evolve in a better and also faster manner. And as I was mentioning, you want to enable your users with better things. That's why you are soliciting, contributions from the community. So that's the primary goal here. And of course, if you are primarily focused on enabling the community with better things, things like stars or other rewards become quite secondary. You wouldn't care about, how many stars you have got on your GitHub repository, as long as it's helping someone else. That's the primary goal here. And also it's helping you. If you have, worked on something critical, it's probably gonna serve as a reference to your future self. And now I wanted to discuss some of the challenges that are faced by the machine learning communities currently. And the challenges are tremendously benefited by the open source world. And here's how. So, there's always a need for increased transparency when it comes to machine learning, because it's very easy to claim something in a paper, and it's not nice if that claim cannot be easily reproduced, right? So by making your components, open, and by publishing your components out there in the wild, let's say on a public GitHub repository, the entire world is able to take part in the conversations, open up, issues, and directly interact with you, right? And that sort of establishes a sense of validation, because the answers are coming from the direct authors. There are no middle parties involved there. So it also enhances trust and increases transparency. And I have also sort of provided a snapshot of a conversation I had with Francois Cholet, the primary creator of Keras, for a pull request, and we, exchanged some questions and answers, and then we sort of reached a mutual consensus. And of course, as I was mentioning, it feels nice to be able to reproduce the results that are presented in a paper, right? It's one thing to see amazing, performance graphs in a paper, and it's probably not that amazing when when you are unable to reproduce the things introduced in that particular paper and not get the expected results. So when the machine learning researchers or other practitioners release their code base and also pre-trained models for the community to reproduce their methods and also their results in their own projects, that feeling is very precious. And I think a lot of industries do get benefited from this kind of open source engagements, because that way they are not having to run any pre-training, which can be expensive at times, and small organizations can take advantage of the pre-trained models, and then they can leverage those models in their own projects. So of course, not all the models come with Apache 2.0 licenses, but most of them come with a very open Apache license, which means that you can use the models for commercial purposes as long as things are attributed nicely. So reproducibility is a very big challenge in machine learning, and by doing things out in the open, it sort of helps to tremendously reduce that problem. And if you are interested in a research project, let's say, but you don't want to keep that research project closed under the hood, you want, open collaboration, you want mentorship from the community. So if you could, have an open forum for discussing your project ideas for potential collaborations and mentorship, I think it benefits both the mentees and also the mentors and also all the collaborators that might be involved in your project idea, because not many people would join a big lab like Google or Facebook or any other, medium scale research lab, but they still want to pursue research independently. And in those cases, open collaboration and mentorship do provide a lot of support. And let's say, you have worked on tools and other projects and you have made them open source, and when you were working on those tools they did not exist. And if you have got any such critical tools or any such complex projects, by making them open source, you also sort of lift off some of that burden from others, right? Your code, even if your code is used by a single developer, it's still a win because you helped that particular developer with your component, right? And that made their life easier. And that is a take pride in doing that. That is a very joyful feeling to have. And of course, it's very easy to start an open source project, but with time it becomes increasingly difficult to maintain an open source project that might be filled with bugs or something like that. And all open source projects have some bugs or the other, right? It's hidden somewhere. It is just waiting to get deciphered. But bugs are always there. So maintenance is a very crucial aspect of any project. And if your open source project, let's say you have, bootstrapped a particular open source project and you don't have the time to go through all the bugs and maintain the library all by yourself. So the good thing about open source is if your project has garnered enough, enough attention from the community, if it has proven to be highly useful for the community, it will, garner maintainers for your project anyway. It's just the divine magic of open source. And no wonder why open source is at the core of ML research and tooling. Most of the ML research papers that come out these days, they, almost always come with, pre-trained models and open source code bases, so that the community members can easily look into their code bases, try out their pre-trained models, and take the research, push the state of the art in of the field. And also there are lots of open source tools in machine learning which tremendously benefit the practitioners. And I also like to think of open source as a vehicle to create opportunities. Let's say you have got something to explain better, maybe code a demo project, maybe a paper. Probably you would want to implement a complicated concept introduced in a paper. Probably code a cool demo project. It can be an ML concept, it can be a particular component for a paper, it can be a Kaggle competition as well, you know. And after you are done, you would want to write a blog post about it. And I think it's very common to see people working in ML writing about stuff, sharing about different resources that they're learning uh, throughout throughout their basically ML journey. So it's very rather uncommon to see ML practitioners not sharing about cool stuff happening around ML. It's in my experience, it's very limited that that I see an ML practitioner not sharing about stuff. There's always some cool new paper. There's always some new cool data set. There's always some new cool model. So when the community collectively thrives to debunk all of this together, this be- this just gets better for everyone in the community, right? So that's why blog public work like blog posts, open source projects are very important in our field. And if you want to maybe blog on an old topic, let's say random forest, random forest, it's absolutely fine. I always like to give the example of Facebook and Orkut. Facebook started way after Orkut, and look how they are doing now. Facebook is still thriving, and Orkut is already distinct, right? So it's okay if you want to, take up an old topic and share your perspectives in the form of a blog post. By all possible means, do that. And of course, take it from the good folks. You do not just have to take it from me, take it from the good folks. So here's Jeremy Howard, chief instructor of the Fast AI course, and Fast AI is a very revered course. Take it from David Robinson. I think he's the chief data scientist of Stack Overflow. And here's also Daniel Seta. I think he is currently a postdoc at Berkeley there. So yeah, take it from the good folks. And some more. So even Stanford University uses a GitHub repository in order to audit their seminal course on convolutional neural networks. If you haven't checked that course out, I highly recommend checking it out. It's amazing. So even a place like Stanford uses GitHub to sort of encourage contributions from the community, and you do not have to be a Stanford student in order to do these things. And here's the authors of the Fast AI book generously open sourced all their Jupyter notebooks they presented in the book so that the community can learn from it. And here's Transfer Shale's deep learning with Python notebooks. Those notebooks are also tremendous learning materials. And you can judge these things by taking a look at the number of stars they have received. I mean, of course, stars is not the only way to measure the success of a GitHub repository, but when you have a genuine resource like the Fast AI book or the Deep Learning with Python book, it sort of speaks. It cuts through the chase. So then there's this book called Grokking Deep Learning, which is also pretty amazing. These authors, all of them, have open source their Jupyter notebooks they used in their books. And here's the OG of OGs, Peter Norvig. He also has this open source repository called PyTunes, which are usually, Python programs for, short problems, but with exciting amount of difficulties. Cool. Now, let's say you do not like the documentation of a particular library, and as they say, without documentation, there's no minimum viable product, right? So if you are feeling like the documentation can be improved, I would suggest you open a PR and contribute directly, because documentation for most of the deep learning or machine learning frameworks, they are all open source. You can easily, navigate to the GitHub repository that houses all the documentation, and you can directly open a PR and contribute there. So you have, probably found something that could have been added to your favorite deep learning or machine learning library. For example, I started contributing to Hugging Face because I wanted to add a bunch of models that were not present in the library. So I just wanted to do it myself and sort of expose myself to the chance of being monitored by the folks that work at Hugging Face, right? They're highly accomplished practitioners in their own accord. So it just feels nice to get mentored by folks by the Hugging Face folks, and also be able to contribute something salient to the library, which will actually impact thousands and thousands of users. So if you have found any bugs in your favorite open source library, go ahead and file an issue. Most of those libraries will be open source anyway. You probably would want to take part in the relevant discussions, like how to go about solving that bug. Be sure to also provide your inputs as to how you see the solution being developed, what are the approaches the library developers could take, help them make the library better for you. And also you could fix that bug by contributing a PR. And take it even further. If you are noticing that there does not exist a library for something that you would want to do, develop that library on your own, because it will make you learn a lot of stuff that you may not learn otherwise. And here are some concrete examples that started out as personal projects and later they garnered tremendous amount of attention from the community. Segmentation models, classification models, Zoo, then there's PyTorch toolbelt, then there's PyTorch image model, the seminal team library, whose GitHub repository name is PyTorch image models. Cool. And here's the OG of OGs, Big Science. I hope you all have heard about GPT-3. So Big Science is basically GPT-3 but on open steroids. You can read all the descriptions of Big Science later. It is basically an open source version of GPT-3 but much better and all open source. You do not have to pay for using it, unlike GPT-3, and it can do all sorts of stuff that GPT-3 is capable of doing. So I highly recommend you to check it out, and it's all there out in the wild. It's all open and public. And I think it's also important that we take a step back and ponder what would have happened if all of these libraries, PyTorch, TensorFlow, Hugging Face, Matplotlib, and whatnot, they were not open sourced and they started charging for their usage. And this wouldn't have been nice, right? So yeah. And it's again, I really like to cite this quotation from Joel Grus. You can stand on the shoulders of the giant if they keep their shoulders private. So imagine what would have happened if these giants kept their shoulders private, right? Right. Start open sourcing today. And if you are really serious about open source, if you have make your dent in the open source world, then know that open source speaks for your skills. You are already in a better place if you have contributed something major to an open source library. Probably you added some utility methods. Probably you added an optimizer. Probably you added a new model. Whatever it may be, if it's something salient, if it's something concrete, then yeah, it's a tremendous contribution to that open source library. Probably you have topped a competition and you have open sourced your solution. Now the competition organizers are curious about your solution and they in fact will get benefit from that. And of course, writing things with unmatched clarity, it does not, it's not born out of thin air. You need to have a consistent mind and consistent practicing mindset in order to write about your learnings and communicate them to the community in a clear manner. So if you have got a stream of blog posts that you have written with unmatched clarity, which are extremely clear and lucid for anyone to understand, I think you are a champion. And if you are a core maintainer of an open source library, if you have maintained that library on a consistent basis, then of course it helps to uplift your technical caliber to a great extent. Basically, with this slide, I just wanted to highlight you can develop anything and everything open source that uniquely positions you for your abilities and for nothing else. Because in ML, you need to gather objective evidence that will prove that you can apply machine learning successfully to real world problems. And those problems can range from anywhere between adding new models all the way to deploying stuff and monitoring them. So, start collecting those objective evidences if you do not have them already. And it might be relevant for professionals if you are in a job that is not ML hungry in nature, if that does not require you to do ML. But if you ever wanted to switch careers to machine learning, probably this blog post would be helpful for you. And of course, we discussed a lot of stuff. Also, always remember that perseverance and consistency are keys. Do not go too hard on yourself so that it wears you out, that is definitely not desirable. And give yourself enough time to think back and question the purpose, whether or not you are doing things in the right manner, or you are doing things for all the right reasons, because you want to be absolutely clear there. Seek clarity over anything else, and be in it, be in the wild ride for the fun and excitement primarily. Because when you start focusing on the fun and excitement quotient, rest of the things, start, you know, rest of the things start feeling very insignificant, because you are in the wild ride for fun and excitement anyway. So you'll figure things out and pursue it uncompromisingly. Like, do not compromise with your passion ever. If you are wanting, if you are wanting to delve deeper into the open source community, I think pursue it uncompromisingly. And here's something that sort of summarizes everything that I feel about open source. I'll let you read this and then I'll proceed to the next slide. All right. I think that's more than 10 seconds. It's enough. All right. Thank you. That was my last slide. So it's been a pleasure talking to you all. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, we can conclude here.
Okay, very nice. Thank you again, Sayak. Thank you very much. Very nice talk.
Okay, I have some questions, Sayak, for you. My first question is, I think this helped a lot because a lot of people ask in my private message on LinkedIn and other stuff, like, how can I start on the ML career without having any experience? And I think open source is a really great way to start and to help the community and show your skills. But my question for you is, how do you manage your time to work on these side projects, on the open source projects, and also work at Carted? Because I know that, like, you have a bunch of work to do at Carted, and you need to find some time to do this open source stuff. How do you manage your time, and how do, like, what kind of tips you can give to us in how to handle this?
I think first is compromise is the key. If you want to do stuff on a consistent basis, you will have to compromise with a lot of things. For example, uh, you probably have to cut off some time to, go out and enjoy a movie. Of course, I'm not saying you should not enjoy a movie with your friends, but if you truly want to deliver that project, uh, you know, earlier than you had expected, probably you would have to allocate some time on a consistent basis, and you would have to come to an agreement that, okay, this is my time. I'm not going to let it flow for any other reason. I'm going to utilize that time to work on the project that I always wanted to complete. So compromise is one of the keys. And second would be an efficient time manager. I think over the course of last few years, I've become a better and more efficient individual that can manage time. So I know the stuff that I'm expected to perform at Carted. I try to give my fullest attention when I'm working on those components. But I'm also equally professional when I'm working on my open source stuff. So often I have seen people when they are working on open source stuff, because it does not pay you or it does not reward you instantaneously, they often, lose the fun, then they often lose the focus, and then they get derailed quite easily. But to me, both of them are parts of my work. I know I want to give back to the community. That's why I cannot, lose sight of it. That's why I try to, give the equal amount of attention to my open source projects. So just because I want to enable the community to the best of my abilities. Just like I do the works at Carded with the best of my abilities, I also want that to be the case when I'm working on open source projects. So with these few things, I pretty much have all the sanity that I need in order to sort of, let's say, work for 7 hours probably for Carded, and then work on my open source stuff daily for 2 to 2.5 hours. And over the past few years, I have also learned to be, more attentive when I'm doing things, because short attention span is a very real disease of 21st century. You lose your focus pretty easily, and it's important to take measurements so that you are not losing your focus. You have a very long attention span when you are working, because it's practically pretty easy to get derailed when you are working, right? There's always something you would like to see, you would like to read, you would like to write, but that is exactly when you would want to prioritize your stuff that is truly important and meaningful for you, and then sort of take actions in order to tackle them.
I see.
Okay.
Makes sense. I feel like talking about my experience sometimes, like when you are excited about what you are doing, it's pretty much easy to really do this stuff. But sometimes you are on a like on a bad side, or you don't want, and this is the time that you need to focus yourself and you need to really put some effort, because this is how you gain consistency, right? Yeah, because when you are excited, it's pretty much easy. I don't know, Vinny, do you have any question? Because I have uh, some others.
I have one, Sayak. Uh, Pedro asked about the individual contribution, like something like that. I would like to know or hear a little bit about the company contribution in two ways. For example, you mentioned GPT-3. For example, I searched in the Google. They estimate to training a GPT-3 model is about $5 million, more or less. I don't know. And in your perspective, why some company expend this money to give for free for the community? In the other hand, why some company, I don't know, in Brazil, I talk about in sales company, banks, and other companies. In this company, don't have this view to, oh no, open source is good for the company. No, open source is not good. I don't know if Carter have some open source projects, but
We
I'd,
have. We have.
yeah, nice. I would like to hear your, what do you think about what some company, big companies spend money, spend people to contribute with the community, and on the other hand, why some company don't see the if a positive way to have some open source projects?
It's a good question. I think I could take the example of Hugging Face, because Hugging Face is mostly open source, and they also have their paid offerings too, right? But mostly Hugging Face is known for its open source stuff. Like, you can try out probably more than 50,000 different models from the Hugging Face Transformers library. You can load them pretty easily within like 2 or 3 lines of code. That's why Hugging Face is pretty popular among the community members. But Hugging Face's paid offerings are pretty nice too. Now with open source, you build a momentum, you build your own community, and once you have that community built, you could slowly start marketing about your paid content, because once you have built that trust through your open source components, and you have already built a community, probably you could turn some of those community members into your business customers, and then sort of let the entire loop get broadened up. So this is what I think Hugging Face did. They started with being pure open source, and most of their offerings are still pretty open source in nature. But they have also introduced, paid offerings that let you deploy your models in a very cost-effective manner. Then they have very fast API inference endpoints that are highly efficient, and they can scale pretty much arbitrarily and horizontally. So you can see a pattern here. You can notice a pattern here. First, they build the community by offering their open source stuff, and then once they had some kind of community vibe going, they introduced their paid. Then they introduced their paid offerings, right? Because they already had a pretty good community that trusted Hugging Face for its open source components. They naturally, it's naturally very easy for them to gain their trust for their paid engagements. So that's why. I mean, most of the paid offerings will have some kind of free pilot anyway. So if you can, expose some of that free pilot with some open source components, this just makes things more transparent and helps to build more trust and more engagement inside the community. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay, thank you.
My other question is, I started, I don't know if you know an event called Hacktoberfest that happens on
Sorry?
October.
Hacktoberfest, yeah. I have a t-shirt.
Yeah, I have two. I started on 2019 and I found super cool. This is my first time contributing to the open source. And I found super difficult at the first time to contribute, because not only about open a PR and this kind of things, but more about, because you need to know how to approach the other person's code. So you need to know how to start to look at the code. My question here is, do you have an advices about how, for example, when you find when you want to work on an issue on Keras, how do you approach it? How do you start to take a look? Because the Keras is a super extensive library. How do you approach it?
Yeah, it's another great question. I'm so glad that you asked it. Well, there's no shortcut. I have literally had tears when I was not able to understand something. I cried for hours and hours. What's happening? I'm not able to understand anything. But I also converted that into a learning opportunity. I knew in my heart that it's gonna be difficult, and if I can somehow get through it, no matter how long it takes, I'm gonna come out as a better person. I'm gonna come out as a better professional, because by the time I complete that PR, I will have developed a new skill set that will be beneficial for others. And that also puts me into that high bar of developers who can do stuff and contribute a new component to that library, right? So on one hand, you get to learn a lot of stuff, but it's difficult. I'm not gonna make faces and say that it's very easy stuff. It's difficult. It's important to acknowledge that and take the time to sort of go through the components step by step. Take your time, go back to the drawing board, ask questions to the library maintainers, and then come back and then start the process all over again. If you have patience, if you have perseverance, and if you know in your heart that you are gonna contribute that PR no matter what, probably it will take 1 year, but it's fine. You are gonna give all of your effort. I think everything will fall in your place. I have been there. I still get that feeling. I'm not probably gonna be able to complete this PR. I get that feeling all the time, but yeah, I try to sort of convert them into learning opportunities, and this pursuit has been super helpful for me.
Good to hear that it's difficult to
It's
because
difficult.
yeah, I think, and it's an important thing. It's a great advice. I think people that wants to start on open source can use the Hacktoberfest as the entry point for it, because it's a good way. You have a lot of easy PRs to solve, and it's super nice. And you have, I think, on the last 3 days we have a bunch of issues related to machine learning, so you can work on machine learning stuff there. So it's pretty good. Yeah, do you have another question, Vinny?
Yes, I have another one, and I would like to come back in the company side. In your opinion, for example, let's say about Google. Google have a lot of open source model about NLP in Hugging Face and a lot of stuffs. But in another hand, Google have a API that for API for NLP processing, and Google sell this NLP processing, and of course AWS, Microsoft, and IBM. A lot of company have a similar product. In your perspective, what's the boundary for the open source in a product way, for example? Because if Google release all things, the competitions can get it and improve this API and etc. In your opinion, what's the boundary here?
I think it depends on the kind of resources that you are putting and investing into a particular project. Let's say if you want your API to be as quick as possible, if you want your API to be as vast and as robust as possible, probably you are already in that niche tier that many companies aren't able to provide. In that, from that aspect, I think it makes sense to sort of charge your users. Probably make the first 1,000 API calls for free and then start charging those users. Again, it's highly contextual, I think. For example, all the free natural language processing models, they are probably not that efficient as far as production deployment is concerned. You would want to make them as efficient as possible so that their latency and throughput both are on par with your application requirements. And most of the open source models or the open source tools do not immediately provide you with that kind of a framework. So this is probably one of the boundaries that companies use in order to price their APIs and also develop the entire ecosystem around the pricing models. So in any priced ML API, you would see a couple of common things. For example, they are really fast. You get predictions instantaneously. They are secure. They are almost 99.9% time available. They have a very low service level agreement. They are always available. They are secure, and they have been already load tested by the engineers at Google. So you also get the trust factor with the APIs, but you also get robustness and pretty big coverage. For example, if you try out Google's named entity recognition API from Google Cloud's natural language processing API suite, you would find that it has a pretty vast coverage that none of the other open source models are able to cover. It has a very vast coverage of different entities that are lying there out in the world. So if your model is already feature enriched in that sense, it's probably already in the niche tier, and you would want to exploit that advantage. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. Pedro?
I think I have a last question, and this is more a personal question because I saw that you wrote a paper, but you are not in a university, right? So you wrote by yourself, yeah. And I want to know how was this experience for you? How did you approach? Because I think that it's much more difficult to publish it. And just to let people know, I think you published this on Triple AI, right? Yeah. So he wrote a paper alone, and he's published on the paper on the Triple AI. And how did you like? How did you do this? Because I think this is a big achievement. Like because you started by yourself this research. Yeah, I want to know about your experience during this process because I think this is part of open source. Do you think like papers and articles is part of open source too?
Uh, let me provide my inputs first. So first of all, I did not write that paper alone. I had a collaborator from IBM Research. So I'm very thankful to my collaborator who acted as one of the project collaborators as well as my pseudo supervisor. Like you would have a supervisor if you are doing PhD or your master's. He acted as my supervisor when I was running the experiments. We discussed different experimental setups. Then we sort of bounce back ideas, and then we sort of take things from there. So it was difficult, but I was also hell bent because if I set out to do something that is really close to my heart, I try to complete it. So, but it was difficult. Uh, it was difficult for me to reason about experiments, try to think of ways that are unique but at the same time creative, and that is when I reached out to my collaborator to for his comments, for his opinions about the kind of stuff I want to do. He generously provided me with feedback and his comments, and then we worked together to work on that paper. But it's a fun fact that when the Attention Is All You Need paper came out in 2016, I think. So it was 2017. I read that paper for the first time, and I was thinking, hey, if if a concept like attention can help a neural network to focus on only the important parts that are relevant for a problem, let's say classification, it should have some better robustness, right? Because even if you distort the lightning conditions, even if you distort the image with other factors, it should still be able to focus on the visible side of a particular object and still be able to recognize it. I had this kind of thought since 2017, but it took me more than 4 years to properly set up experiments, have a collaborator guide me, write a paper, and get it published from a tier one venue like AAA. I think that was not my primary goal though. I just had something on my subconscious mind, and I just went with my instincts, and things just happened. But I try to also contribute to the research community in my own ways. For example, I also delivered a tutorial at CVPR last year. This year also I'm delivering a tutorial at New Rips. I haven't announced it yet because there's no official announcement post from the New Rips organizers. But yeah, I'm also delivering a tutorial at New Rips this year. So I try to meaningfully contribute to the research community as far as my skills are concerned. I'm not a super heavy researcher. My math background still sucks. So I'm not a mathematician, I'm not a research scientist, but I still have some ideas that I often, come across when I'm working or when I'm walking or doing something else. And I try to communicate them or sort of make them accessible for the research community as well. And open source plays a big part in that because my I we released the paper preprint way before AAA so that other researchers could refer to that paper, and it garnered more than 30 citations, I think, even before we got accepted into AAA. So that was a very precious achievement for me. And we also open sourced the code base so that researchers could refer to it and refer to our experiments to improve the state of the art for even further. So whatever I discussed in the talk just a while back, I actually follow them in my personal life too. So the paper was just a testament for that.
It's super nice to hear. Yeah,
Very
and I
nice.
found I'm studying about robustness, and I found like I read I didn't read the full paper yet, but I read some parts and I found super cool, and it gave me some insight. So yeah, great paper.
Oh, thank you. Right.
Okay, we are 1 hour here, and so Pedro, do you have any more questions?
No, I just want to say thank you, Sayak. I think
Cool. My
everyone really
pleasure.
enjoy it. I think the open sources are really relevant, and that I think in Brazil people need to start doing more because it's important for the community. As you said, if we don't have TensorFlow, Torch, and Hugging Faces, and all these kind of libraries, I think we will still like doing CNNs and this kind of things yet, or running MLPs. So it's super important to have these projects. Yeah. So thank you for accept, and I hope you enjoy it too.
Yep, cool. I enjoyed the question very much. Thanks for asking and thanks for having me here. I'll see
Thank you
folks
again.
there. Bye.
Bye. Ok. Bom, Pedro, mais uma vez, obrigado aí pela organização dessa live. Foi muito bom mesmo ter o Sayak aqui. Então, obrigadão mais uma vez aí por organizar, por ter convidado. Foi muito bom ouvir ele. Quem sabe em breve, no futuro, a gente pode ter ele presencial aqui, né? Precisa aqui com o pessoal organizar algum evento presencial em breve.
Exatamente. E vamos ver de trazer mais gente também, né, Vini? Acho que é legal trazer esses tipos de temas. Às vezes a gente fica tanto no técnico, mas no dia a dia não é só o técnico, né? Que tem que ter essa visão mais ampla. Então é bem legal trazer esse tipo de tema.
Então, isso aí. Bom, vamos lá. Feriado.
É aproveitar agora. Valeu,
Bom
galera.
almoço aí para o pessoal que estava acompanhando. Pedro, obrigado mais uma vez.
Valeu você, Vini.
E nos vemos em breve. Tchau, tchau, gente.